right, thank you. What a great looking crowd. And what an exciting evening we have tonight. My name is Charles Pearson, and I am the Executive Director of the Sumners Foundation. I've got to be honest with you about why I'm up here to introduce such an internationally recognized speaker like Karl Rove. You know, when you have somebody of that stature that is known around the planet, you think, wow, that's kind of like getting somebody to introduce him is like getting a warm-up act for U2 or Garth Brooks or for the younger crowd, Taylor Swift, right? I mean, well, who do you get for somebody like that? So the World Affairs Council got together and they said, you know, we really need an amazing person to introduce, Karl Rove. And they said, you know what, we want to get the most successful person we possibly can get. And they made their list and they called that individual, and unfortunately they were not available tonight. So they went back to the drawing board and they said, okay, if we can't get the most successful, let's get the best speaker we can possibly get to introduce Karl Rove. And they made their list and they called their top choice, and that person wasn't available tonight either. So they said, okay, strike two. If we can't get the most successful, if we can't get the best speaker, let's get the best looking person we can possibly get to introduce Karl Rove. And unfortunately, that person wasn't available either. So strike three, they huddled up and they said, boy, we're not doing too well here. And Liz and the team, they called me up. They said, Charles, we are desperate. And I've got to be honest, I felt so bad about turning them down the first three times. I said, okay, I'll do it. I'll do it. Obviously, none of that's true, right? The truth of the matter is, I'm the Executive Director of the Sumners Foundation, and we are proud to sponsor this event tonight. And so, of course, it makes sense to ask the person sponsoring the event to introduce such a decorated speaker as Mr. Rove. For those that may not know, I want to welcome you. We have former Deputy Chief of Staff of the George Bush administration, Karl Rove, and he's going to be moderated this evening by Council President and CEO Liz Brailsford. The Sumners Foundation, for those that may not know us, our mission is to encourage the study, teaching, and education into the art and science of self-government, to the end that the American people may understand the fundamental principles of democracy and be guided thereby in shaping governmental policies. That's what our mission is all about. So this is our 75th year. Thank you, yes. Our very own Congressman Sumners served in Congress for 34 years. He was a man of principle. He was a man that stood up to his own president when FDR tried to stack the Supreme Court. And he said that is an absolute assault and breach to the balance of power in our Constitution. And that was a very courageous thing to do, and something we're very proud of with our founder. We want to thank the Warwick Melrose Hotel for hosting us this evening. And we have some students and teachers here tonight joining us from across the region. The Council's Global Young Leaders Program provides essential opportunities for educators and students to engage with their programming, and we're happy to have all of you with us. Thank you especially to Linda and Richard Schaefer, who have generously supported this program for some time. The Council would also like to thank and acknowledge its institutional partners this evening for your support, including ACOM, AT&T, Dallas Baptist University, Dallas College, Frost Bank, Harwood International, Haynes Boone, Hillwood, Jackson Shaw, Lockheed Martin, NEC Corporation of America, PNC Bank, Sidley Austin, and Vistra Energy. Please, as a reminder, if you haven't already, silence your cell phones. If you haven't checked, please do that this evening before we begin. And it's a great pleasure to introduce our speakers tonight. Karl Rove served as a senior advisor to the President George W. Bush, from 2000 to 2007, and Deputy Chief of Staff from 2004 to 2007. At the White House, he oversaw the Offices of Strategic Initiatives, Political Affairs, Public Liaison, and Intergovernmental Affairs, and was Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, coordinating the White House policymaking process. Before Karl Rove became known as the architect of President Bush's 2000 and 2004 campaigns, he was president of Karl Rove Company, an Austin-based public affairs firm that worked for over 75 Republican candidates for senator, governor, and congressman, as well as nonpartisan causes and nonprofit groups. Today, Mr. Rove writes a weekly op-ed for the Wall Street Journal and is a Fox News contributor. He is the author of 2 books entitled The Triumph of William McKinley and the 2010 New York Times bestseller, Courage and Consequence. Our moderator this evening is Liz Brailsford. Liz is the president and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth. Liz joined the council in February 2021 from the World Affairs Council of America, the network's national office in Washington, D.C., where she served as chief operating officer. Liz currently serves as an international task force member of the Dallas Regional Chamber, an ex officio board member with the North Texas Commission, and an advisory committee member of the U.S. Global Leadership Commission of the Southwest region. She holds an MPA in Global Policy from the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School and a BA in Media Arts from the University of South Carolina. Please join me in welcoming Karl Rove and Liz Brailsford to the stage.
So lucky we got Charles. Third time was a charm.
Well, hi, Karl. What an honor.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you very
Honor's
much
mine.
for being here. I was listening to the Axe Files, a podcast recently with David Axelrod, and you mentioned that this is a very unusual election.
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep it very small for a couple of questions. Why is this election unusual?
I think it's sort of self-evident, isn't it?
You mentioned something specifically.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. I agreed to do this because I happened to be in Fort Worth earlier today, actually earning a living, interviewing a out-of-work former government employee who's now a painter, George W. Bush. So it was it was payback time, Mr. President. Anyway, happy to be here and thrilled to be interviewed by Liz. First of all, David Axelrod, I don't want to, we'll keep this among ourselves. We're off the record here, right? He's my friend and a really good man. And it's sort of odd to have the arch Republican and the arch Democrat be friends, but we are. And we sort of met in a weird way. I'd written a White House memoir, and out of the blue, I got an email from David Axelrod, who was then the senior advisor to Barack Obama, saying, I read your book and enjoyed it. How he got my email address, I don't really know, but I think it involves some kind of intelligence agency. But he said, I enjoyed your book and thought you might like to see this, might like to, and there was an attachment. And it was a story written by a young journalist about how he had been, while he was in college, had been called upon by the police had knocked on the door of his dorm room in New York and had asked him to come with him. His roommate thought it was because they had some illicit substance hidden away underneath one of their beds to smoke later on. But he was asked to go with the police in order to identify the body of his father, a healthcare professional who had committed suicide. And it was a beautiful story. It was beautiful, it was beautifully written. You could just feel the pain and the grief of the young man who was David Axelrod writing about his father. My mother committed suicide, David's father committed suicide, so we bonded over this and do suicide prevention events together. But he's a good guy, and we don't agree on everything. In fact, we disagree on a lot, particularly when it comes to policy, but we can do so with friendship and admiration and mutual respect, which I think is too little in play today. So our politics are broken. We have 2 candidates that neither one of whom ought to be running for president. And most of us feel that way. 3/4 of the American people think that Joe Biden is too old, and 2/3 of the American people think the word corrupt at best describes Donald Trump. we're going to end up voting one of them into office primarily because we're going to be motivated more by disdain and dislike of the other guy than out of wild enthusiasm for our own guy. Each guy has his own group of, adherents who are enthusiastic about him, but most of the voters who are going to make up their minds and decide this election are going to say we're taking the lesser of two evils, and not a good place to be as a country. I hope we can get into this, but it's not the first time we've been in a bad place, and we need to remember that as we go through this. Too many of us are, woe is us, we've never been here, how are we going to survive? Democracy is threatened. This may be the last election in America. Baloney. We've been here before, and we forget that at our own peril. Anyway, that's my short summary of this wonderful, exciting opportunity we have to choose our president for the next 4 years.
And you mentioned on the podcast that 1892 is the last time that this type of election had happened.
Yeah.
So very rare.
Well, the last time two presidents faced each other in a contest like this is the election of 1893. Benjamin Harrison has narrowly won the 1888 election, defeating the incumbent Grover Cleveland. And 4 years later, angered by the Republican spending habits, they had passed the first $1 billion budget for the federal government. The Republican Speaker of the House said we're a $1 billion country, but the country didn't have it. It wasn't excited about it. And so in 1892, Grover Cleveland comes in and returns the favor, kicking out Benjamin Harrison. The last time we had two people who had run successively against each other was 1956. Eisenhower beats Stevenson in 52, and 56 we have a rerun. But the last time two presidents face each other in an election like this is 1892.
The election is less than 7 months away, 6 months and 10 days.
Not that anybody's counting.
Exactly. All right. Exactly. Okay. So we have this time length, and the presumptive nominees are in a dead heat. And because of this dead heat, do you think that we will? This is a small nitty-gritty question, right. But do you think that we're going to have the answer the night of the grand race culmination, or is this going to drag out for weeks?
I think it'll be relatively quick, but we do have a problem in our politics, and that is Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and a couple of others. Here in Texas, half of the vote gets voted early. Between the mail-in ballots and the early voting locations, more than half the people who vote in a Texas election vote before Election Day, and it is the first precinct that is reported for every county in the state. Because we're allowed, like Florida and a lot of other states, to begin processing, particularly the mail-in ballots, when they arrive. Florida, same thing. Over half of the vote is cast absentee, a lot more in mail-in than in-person voting like in Texas. And they prepare those ballots so that literally the moment the polls close, they can run all the mail-in ballots through the machines and count them. Bam, done. You cannot begin working ballots in Pennsylvania until the polls close. So they're lucky to be able 2 or 3 days later to get the mail-in ballots. California, everybody's mail-in, but you're allowed to receive ballots after the election. Do you know there is one, in California they have the jungle primary where the two top vote getters, regardless of party, go into the general election. We have one congressional primary in California from the April 4th primary that is still at this point undecided because of the way that we process the ballots. So I think that undermines people's confidence in the election and gives people who want to make hay with, having come up short, something to talk about. But yes, I think we will. But who's going to win is very much up in the air because of the nature. You mentioned it's a dead heat. It is a dead heat. But think about this. Hillary Clinton was ahead by 2.5 points, and lost. 75,000 votes in 3 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. In 2020, Donald Trump is 4.5 points behind Joe Biden, 7 million votes, but the election comes down to 44,000 votes in Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia. So if it's dead even today, that's bad news for Biden. Biden is going to need to be 2 or 3 points ahead nationally because given the Electoral College, there are a lot more Democrats in places like New York and Massachusetts and Illinois and California and Washington State and Hawaii, sort of making those states bluer than they need to be, and not enough of Democrats in battleground states, or at least not enough to place them out of contention.
Well, it just came out a couple days ago that Biden is trailing in 6 of the 7 battleground states. I don't know if we really need to pay attention to that at this point, but you wrote, quote, both parties' frontrunners have enormous weaknesses. Do you think there's a chance we'll have someone pop up at this point?
A third party?
Well, and let's go into third parties,
Yeah.
might as well. No labels, good idea, bad idea?
Yeah.
You already said
so,
no?
So first of all, be careful about these polls. Yes, Morning Consult today, Biden is behind in 6 of the 7 battlegrounds. Now, first of all, one of them, North Carolina, is probably in Trump's camp unless something dramatically happens. He won it last time, he's likely to win it again. But we say 7 battlegrounds, but it's 6 battlegrounds and 1 maybe battleground. But be careful about looking at those and saying he's ahead, because again, it's outside the margin of error. So yeah, he's ahead. Trump is ahead in 6 of 7, but he's ahead outside the margin of error in 3, North Carolina and 2 others. And as a result, you know, and at the end of the day, if they go into election day, and Biden is really realistically a point or 2 behind in a critical battleground state, he may win that state, because the one thing we know is a ground game has an impact on winning the vote. Can't buy you 10 points, can't buy you 5 points, but it can buy you a couple of points. So he's got the money, he's got the resources, he's got the time, he's got the mindset of I've got to go out there and organize, and they are. So you go to Arizona and there are 20 some odd headquarters probably already open, and hundreds of staff already engaged in knocking on people's doors and working the lists. And let me just tell you, big data allows you to clearly identify groups of people who are low propensity supporters of your party and who the persuadable swing voters are, and to understand with clarity what it is that you, whichever camp you're in, need to say in order to get those people in your camp. And right now, the guy who's got the head start on that is Joe Biden. So I'd be very careful about, you know, if he's 1 point down in, you know, fill in the blank, Michigan, he can make up that one point if he is better organized and has paid more attention to the ground game than Donald Trump either is inclined to do or can do. Because remember, we're talking about of what Trump raised last year, which is a pretty good sum. $56 million went to pay lawyers, and that was before they showed up in court. So, you know, these damn lawyers, they can be expensive.
I'm going to circle back to money, but you mentioned, let's talk about third party. Third party, RFK, I happened to see him last night speak, incidentally.
I'm glad you added the speak thing, because the idea of you dating Kennedy makes me a little nervous.
Oh, goodness. Okay, moving on. So, are they going to be consequential in this race?
Please. Absolutely.
Because he's polling at 9 or 10%, isn't he, RFK?
Well, yeah, but he will not be pulling that by Election Day, because the typical thing is that by Election Day it collapses. But think about it. In 2016, the Green Party candidate, Jill Stein, got more votes in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania than Hillary Clinton lost those states by. 6% of the American electorate voted third party. And those 3 states, the sort of generally left candidate, third-party candidate, got more votes than she lost by. 2020, just under 2% vote for a third-party candidate. But the Libertarian candidate, Jo Jorgensen, anybody know Jo Jorgensen? Who would know what Jo does? She is a lecturer at Clemson in psychology. She got more votes in Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia than Donald Trump lost the states by. So the third-party candidates, and we're going to have Cornel West, Robert Kennedy, Jill Stein, a Libertarian, maybe somebody else, are going to play a dispositive role in this election in all likelihood. We are likely to have somebody lose a state by a smaller number of votes than a third-party candidate gets.
Well, I went to the university.
And particularly in this election. I mean, it's not like, I mean, we do have, don't get me wrong, Biden and Trump both have groups of people who are excited about voting for him, but they are not the normal compliment that we have in election. There are a lot of people who are just saying, I'm holding my nose. And there are going to be a lot of people who say, you know what, I'm going to throw my vote away. I'm either not going to vote or I'm going to vote for a third-party candidate.
Okay, let's talk about the African American vote. You were talking about this particularly with Georgia and that vote there. And where is that?
You did listen to the whole darn thing, didn't you?
I do my homework. I do my homework. But where do they come into play through all this? And for that matter, let's talk about the Latino vote and the youth.
Right.
Which you said.
So elections are about turnout. You got to turn your people out. And so we've been in a secular period since 1996 where each election, with the exception of 2012, the share of the voting age population that turns out to vote has increased. And starting in 96, so the turnout in close states matters a lot. A 1% decline in the black turnout in Georgia, or a 1% decline in Biden's share of the black turnout, of the black vote, wipes out his winning margin of 10,000 plus votes. A 7% decline in the turnout in 18 to 34-year-old voters in Arizona wipes out his winning margin. So if you take a look at these three groups, which are historically Democrat-leaning groups, Trump is running, in some places, 15 to 20% among young black men, and running, 10, 12, 14, 16% among all blacks. The Hispanic vote is in play. Now, we say the Hispanic vote, it's actually the Hispanic communities, because if you're Colombian American, Venezuelan American, Puerto Rican, Mexican American, you're different than, And in fact, the Mexican American community in Texas is different than the Mexican American community in California. But something is going on in the Hispanic community that says, you know what? My historic allegiance to the Democratic Party is being undermined. And then you go to young voters who are not excited about either one of these people and are going to be the largest pool for these third-party candidates. And Biden's got trouble there. There's a reason why they're doing climate and debt relief, because they think that they got to do both of these things in order to energize 18 to 34-year-old voters. But if I were a Democrat, I'd be worried, because you cannot walk into an election with the vibrations going on that they've got going on in these three voter groups. Now, on the other side of it, college-educated suburban Republicans, Nikki Haley, yesterday or Tuesday, got 20% of the vote in Pennsylvania. Now, this is high, and I've been through this experience before. In 2000, we were in the late primaries getting 15% for John McCain. But 20% in Pennsylvania is a problem, because if you look at it, it's clustered in Bucks, Montgomery, Delaware, and Chester, the four big suburban counties outside of Philadelphia, Lancaster and Erie, which are historically swing areas of the state. And this was a targeted message by some Republicans saying, Donald, got to pay attention to me. I'm for Nikki, and I'm not for you. And the problem here is that she sort of got out of the race 6 weeks ago, and she has yet to get a phone call from Donald J. Trump. And you cannot unite the party unless you work at uniting the party. And it ain't fun. I mean, 2000, it was easy to try and make overtures to John McCain, but try making overtures to some of the people around him. It wasn't a pleasant experience, but we had to do it if you wanted to unite the party. And at the end of the day, both parties have problems. One of them with turnout, and one of them's pretty straightforward, suburbanites, and the other one's a little bit more complicated, blacks, browns, and young people. But both of them are facing a problem, and it could be reflected not so much in the share of the vote that they get in November from these groups, but the fact that their share of the turnout drops.
You said
it's a mess,
to say the least. You said the siege on January 6th was, quote, a stain on our history, and every one of those sons of, pardon me, bitches who did that, we ought to find them, try them, and send them to jail. And you've called Trump's pledge to free imprisoned rioters, quote, a critical mistake.
Yeah.
So is that the number one strategy that that Biden's campaign should use? And if not, what is the number one strategy that both campaigns should use to move actual numbers?
Well, first of all, I've been saying this since essentially shortly after January 6th. I actually wrote my first column on the issue of election denial was written the Thursday, the week after the election. And I pointed out that in American history, there have been only 3 statewide elections in which the winner on the election night saw his win reversed in a recount, and those 3 instances involved a difference between the 2 candidates of several hundred votes, not 10,000, not 25,000. And I said the likelihood of this election being overturned is slim and none. I immediately got a text message from somebody at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue who had my cell phone number, and let me just say he was not a happy camper with what I said. But it's true, and look, I read all 63 cases, and I know it's unpopular in my party, but I read them. And this is not helpful to our country to allege things that are not borne out by the facts. I had one of my White House colleagues stand up at a news conference in Las Vegas and say 22,000 dead people voted in this election, swinging it from Donald Trump, the legitimate winner in Nevada, to Joe Biden. Do you know how many dead people voted in the election in Nevada? There's not a state in the country that doesn't have procedures in place to take the list of obituaries from the Social Security Administration and check them against the voter file in order to find out people who died cast a ballot. You know how many dead people in Nevada cast a ballot? 2. One of them was a mistake. A woman who was taking care of her father in her home, he dies, she takes the ballot, fills it out, sends it in. A day or 2 later, gets the ballot for her and realizes she's taken her dad's ballot and mailed it in. So she holds on to her ballot in the event somebody shows up the day after the election. And guess what? They showed up after the election and said, your father was dead and yet he voted. And she said, sorry, my mistake. Here's my ballot, which I didn't turn in. The other one was a widower. His wife died. He held a news conference saying this is prime evidence of the fact that Nevada was stolen from Donald Trump by people voting ballots like my wife's. He was then indicted because it was his damn handwriting on the ballot. So yeah, were things done that maybe shouldn't have been done? We saw some of that here in Texas. The Harris County election chief decided that we're going to have, under Texas law, people who are not able to walk to the polls are allowed to vote in their car. And he decided everybody was going to be able to vote in their car. Well, this went to the Texas Supreme Court, and they quickly, by 9-0, said, no, that's not what the law allows. And really, do we want that? Yeah, I got my landscaping crew. I run the little business. Let's all get in the car. We'll get in the truck, and we'll all go down and vote together, and I'll see how you're voting. Really? That's the way we want to go about doing it? So we got some stuff that happened like that. States that said, okay, we're going to send out mail-in ballots to everybody. Not just active voters, but the inactive list. That's a problem. But the way to solve that is to have a lawyer who's working for the presidential campaign who goes into court and says, thou shalt not do this, it's in violation of the law. And Donald Trump did not have lawyers doing that. So some of that stuff got handled and some of it didn't. But I'm sorry. If you believe that the election was stolen, I'm sorry, it was not. Now, January 6th, I sat in a studio in Fox in Austin, Texas, horrified watching what went on. I worked in that place. I was a 21-year-old kid working in the U.S. Capitol. And to see that somebody would think it is an appropriate, free expression of speech to beat up cops and to break through a police line and attempt to stop a constitutionally mandated session of the United States Congress in order to force somebody not to accept the results of the election, that just pisses me off. And yes, those people this whole idea that Trump has created a problem for himself. The president has made a big mistake. These are not hostages. These are not political, prisoners. These are in many cases thugs, including people with long records before January 6th. And the courts ought to deal with them. My test is, change the name. Would anybody say, okay, that was great if Joe Biden was trying to storm the Capitol, have his people storm the Capitol? Really? You think it's going to be fun? What happens if Trump wins the fall election? Should Kamala Harris refuse to accept the electoral college votes of certain states? No. So, you know, I got 8, count them, 8 emails saying, "You dumb son of a bitch, I'm coming for you, blah, 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 blah." My poor wife, you know, immediately got upset. I had to hire a cop to sit outside our house for 3 or 4 days. But I'm glad I said it months ago. I said it at a speech in January in California, and then it just so happens it shows up on some MSNBC program. He got the footage from the Rancho Mirage Writers Festival, and it shows up on television, and suddenly it's news. Well, guess what, boys and girls? I've been saying that for a long time, and proud of saying it. Now, you know, it was an insult to our country. Those people were carrying our flag when they did that, when they beat up cops, when they tried to find Nancy Pelosi, when they sat at the desks of members of Congress, when they sent, you know, Republican and Democrat members scurrying through the tunnels. And it was wrong, and they ought to be held to account. We as a country cannot accept it, whether it's Republicans or Democrats. That's our responsibility to uphold the laws. My party used to be the party of law and order, not the party of beating up Capitol Hill cops, stealing their shields, beating down the doors, and attempting to stop members of Congress from doing their duty.
So, Karl.
Yes.
Tell us how
Sorry.
you really feel.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's fast forward a second and say that President Biden gets into office and God forbid something befalls him. What is your assessment of the readiness of Kamala Harris?
She's look, I'm sort of a blunt guy. She's unqualified for office. I mean, I had Senator Cornyn's a good friend of mine, and so I have a hunting lease in South Texas, Kennedy County. I made the mistake of loaning it to Dick Cheney once, and he proceeded to shoot my lawyer. Harry Whittington was when I started my business in 1981, he was my landlord, my lawyer, and secretary-treasurer of Rove Company, a position he held until February of last year. John Watson and I were both great friends of Harry's, anyway. So I say to Cornyn, invite some of your buddies down. So every year we have a bunch of senators come down and hunt quail. My personal favorite was Todd Young from Indiana, freshman Republican, Marine. And let's just say that he was not good at bird hunting. And everybody gave him a hard time about not being able to shoot quail. And he said, finally he had enough of it. He said, look, the only shotgun we have in the Marines is a 10-gauge shotgun that shoots a spent uranium pellet to blow out a door, so stop giving me all this crap. So, which we did, we continued to give him. But anyway, we're sitting around the campfire a couple of years ago, and there's a member, he's a longtime friend of mine, and he's a wonderful guy. He can find the best in anybody. You know, the devil is evil, but he's got such a winning personality at dinner, you know. And so I said, we were sitting around the campfire, and I said, well, you served on a committee with her, what's she like? And he said, I expected him to say blah, blah, and the blah, on the other hand, this. 20 minutes later, he finished the rant. She's a terrible human being. She's mean to her staff. She's mean to other people's staff. She's mean to other members. It's a sign of lack of courtesy and, you know, appropriate behavior. She's not very bright. You know, she's got a shtick. She comes and asks these kind of questions and then disappears. She doesn't do her homework. We have serious business on our committee, and it's clear she doesn't read the material, she doesn't discuss the material, she doesn't understand the material. She doesn't work. We have to talk to each other, and she won't. She won't even talk to her own party's colleagues, let alone the Republicans. He said she's a terrible human being. And this is why this is going to be the first presidential election in a long, long time in which one guy's choice of a running mate is going to have an impact. Because you probably hear it from your Republican friends. I hear it from my friends. I don't like Trump. I like sort of what he did, but I don't like him. But Biden's too old, and I don't want her to be president if something happens to him. So this may be one where if he picks somebody who is a sycophant, who's a follower, it's going to hurt him. But if he picks somebody that we look at and say, oh, you know, Tim Scott, he seems up to it, or Glenn Youngkin, he seems up to it, or Brian Kemp, he seems up to it. He's not going to be Ronald Reagan. He's not going to say, you know what, I'm confident enough in my own skin. I'm going to pick the guy who's my principal opponent and ask him to join me because we can unite our party. Not going to do that. So he's not going to ask Nikki Haley. But it's going to be a real important choice. And it's, you know, he has to make it by July.
Okay, we don't have much time left, and so I want to go into the international side, and then I want to go into a quick lightning round.
Lightning round.
Before that, I want you to bear with me for a second because I have 3 quotes, and I want to read them because I think it's staggering, so bear with me for a second. About a week ago on social media site X, formerly Twitter, Miles Taylor, Chief of Staff in the Department of Homeland Security under Trump, wrote, "After 2016, I helped lead the U.S. government response to Russia's election interference. In 2024, foreign interference will be worse. Technology is more powerful, adversaries more brazen, American public more susceptible. Political leaders across party lines must unite against this." That's number 1. Number 2, then Catherine Belton of the Washington Post reported on a secret 2023 document from Russia's foreign ministry calling for an, quote, offensive information campaign and other measures that attacked, quote, a coalition of unfriendly countries led by the U.S. Those measures are designed to affect the military, political, economic, and trade and informational psychological spheres of Russia's perceived adversaries. Excuse me, that's number 2. Last one. Recently, lawmakers, including those in the Republican Party, have increasingly called out the degree to which Russian propaganda has infiltrated American politics through Republican lawmakers and media figures. Earlier this month, Republican Representatives Michael Turner and Mike McCall in Intelligence and Foreign Affairs committees warned about Russian disinformation in their party. Turner told CNN State of the Union that it is, quote, absolutely true that Republican members of Congress are parroting Russian propaganda. Quote, "We see directly coming from Russia attempts to mask communications that are anti-Ukraine and pro-Russia messages, some of which we're even hearing being uttered on the House floor." When asked which Republicans had fallen to Russian propaganda, McCall answered that it is, quote, obvious. What do we do?
Well, there's not much that can be done between now and November. I've got one theory, which is these social media companies need to authenticate the accounts. Because what's happening is our malign actors in North Korea, China, Russia, Iran, the Balkans are creating phony accounts. In 2016, one of the most widely read Twitter accounts was 10GOP, TEN-GOP, which featured the state symbol of the state seal of Tennessee and a Republican elephant, and distributed incredibly anti-Semitic, anti-black, anti-Hillary Clinton messages, and was constantly retweeted and was specifically aimed to gain the attention of, which it did, of then candidate Trump, his son Donald Jr., and Eric, and campaign officials who constantly were retweeting material. The Tennessee Republican Party said, that's not us. It took until August of 2017 for Twitter to take the account down after finding out that it was being run by Prigozhin's internet troll farm in St. Petersburg, Russia. And this is going on today on a scale that makes that look peanuts. For example, the Prigozhin is gone, but the troll farm still exists and is now being run by Putin. And they have a thing called Washington Weekly, which is a wonderful site. If you want to go and find out what kind of festivals are going on in Washington and where there are bars to go to that weekend and what the weather is going to be like in Washington, you can go to Washington Weekly, which is run by the troll farm. And they put information in there that attacks us and our allies. For example, that's the source of the argument that U.S. military aid to Ukraine was spent by the Ukrainian government on 2 super yachts. And this was repeated by Marjorie Taylor Greene, who loves every conspiracy that she can find. So I wrote about it a couple weeks ago because it was not only Marjorie Taylor Greene, but also it was J.D. Vance, who knows better. He went on Steve Bannon and said, you know, I'm against giving aid because if we give them more aid, they're just going to buy another yacht. So I put this in my column last week. And J.D. Vance's office called up and complained to my editor, saying Rove is wrong. He never said that. So my editor called me and said, where did you get that? I said, look at the footnote. I footnote all this stuff in my. I said, look at the footnote. I got it off of a Steve Bannon appearance by him, and I'll be happy to send you the video, which I sent him. So he sent it on to J.D. Vance's office and says, exactly what are you complaining about? But this is how far it's gone, and it's going to be worse. Until we finally get to authentication, we've got to require these accounts to be set up with a credit card, even if it's $1. Even if it's 50 cents, you got to show up with a credit card, because that allows us to find out, do you really exist? Meta just announced it was 48. They found 4,800 Facebook pages, phony Facebook pages, controlled by the Chinese. And I happened to talk to a friend of mine who was a big executive inside Meta, and I said, how big is it? And he said, that's a fraction. It's this much out of this big. And it's getting worse, particularly with generative AI. So plan on this fall, because we don't authenticate these accounts, plan on there lots of being phony TV ads and phony video ads that feature candidates and voices and arguments that are going to be completely phony and designed to pit us against each other and to mess around with our elections.
Lightning round, very brief.
Yes.
Okay. If you had to call it today, who wins presidency, Senate, and House?
If the election were today, Trump for president, Republicans for the Senate, and the House narrowly Democrat. I used to think it'd be more Democrat, but there are basically an equal number of toss-up House races, and the Republicans are in better shape than I thought they would be at this point.
This divisive nature, yes or no, is our democracy going to fail at some point?
No.
No.
Just think, there's a brilliant piece that appeared in the Wall Street Journal weekend section in August. If you want a copy of it, send me an email at karl@rove.com, very complicated, karl@rove.com, and I will send you a PDF of the piece. I think I did a hell of a job on it myself, but it basically makes the case. We've been here before, and most of you, many of them in this room, remember the 60s and 70s, and it was worse then. The violence was worse, the ugliness of American politics was worse. I mean, I was with 43 earlier today, and this somehow came up, and he brought it up himself. He said, in '68 he thought American politics was coming apart, and it maybe was. I mean, think about all the disruptions of the 1960s over race and an unpopular war. I mean, we have an 18-month period in 1971 and 72 in which there are 1,800 domestic bombings in the United States. We have 10,000 people in Grant Park trying to shut down the Democratic Convention in '68. I was a young volunteer at the '72 Republican Convention in Miami Beach and got caught in tens of thousands of protesters who stormed the Republican Convention site and made it impossible for the sitting president of the United States to take a motorcade into the convention. He had to be helicoptered in to accept the Republican nomination. The sitting president of the United States, who was about ready to win 49 states.
Speaking of President Bush, who, besides him, who's your favorite president?
Abraham Lincoln.
Okay. Who would be your ideal candidate to vote for in November?
Anybody but these two.
All right. And what's your sign? Just kidding. Last question.
Capricorn, but I have no idea what it means. I'm a birthday boy, incidentally. Christmas Day.
Oh, love that.
Yes, and none of you would ever come to my Christmas party, birthday party on Christmas, because you'd claim that you got family. Christmas same? Yeah.
Aww.
And do they come to your birthday party on Christmas?
He does.
Yeah, well, he's married to you. He's got to.
Not work, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Last question. Who will you likely be voting for in November?
None of your damn business.
All right. Well, we're going to
Who are you voting for?
Hey, none of your business.
Yeah, good.
We're going to open it to questions. So, yes, Ray, yes.
Assuming that we do have only the choice of Bush and Trump, who's adding another person, Trump or
Biden.
Do you have any feel that we're going to have another 4 years of all of the aggravation that we've had for the past 4? And will it even be worse?
I don't think it will be worse, because one of them is going to win and one of them is going to lose. That's part of it. But the other part of it is, I sense something's going on in Washington. And that is that, look, the men and women we send there, most of them did not go up there in order to be measured by how many times they got on MSNBC or Fox or how many retweets they've gotten. They just didn't. They went up there to try and do something good for their state or their country. Think about the three big things that happened in 2023. Passage of the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS bill, and a gun control measure. None of those happened because the White House said do it. They happened because individual members said, you know what, I'm done. I actually want to get something done. Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans on the transportation bill, it was not their turn to reauthorize the Highway Trust Fund as we do every 5 years. It was the House's turn to lead, and the House Transportation Democrats came up with a stupid reauthorization of the Highway Trust Fund. They said no monies appropriated under the Highway Trust Fund may be used to increase capacity on any interstate highway or to create any new interstate mile of new interstate highway. So Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats on the Transportation Committee said it wasn't our time to take the lead. We took the lead 5 years ago, but we're not going to wait for that piece of trash to come over here. And so they reauthorized the Highway Trust Fund, and they said, well, we did that so well, and we all agreed. Can we all agree upon what we might do in terms of building infrastructure and what's a reasonable amount of money, and can we negotiate a bill for the next 10 years for infrastructure? That's how that happened. Same thing happened on the CHIPS bill. Todd Young, whom I mentioned, freshman Republican from Indiana, said, I'm concerned about what will happen to our economy if China takes Taiwan in 2027 like they say they're going to. What's that going to do to our modern economy? We get 90% of our chips from there, mainly because Texas Instruments pissed off one of their key employees and he went home. But and he found out that the senior Democrat on the Senate Intel Committee, Mark Warner, felt the same way, and then came the CHIPS bill. And then John Cornyn, who loves to hunt, and Chris Murphy of Connecticut, who hates guns, came together after Uvalde and said, what can we do? And they passed a bill. We all paid attention to red flag laws, but these two guys, that wasn't what the bill was all about. These guys said, well, how did this happen? It happened because that kid did bad things as a 16 and 17-year-old that made it impossible for him to purchase a weapon, and at the age of 18, poof, they disappeared from his record. And so he went out and got an AR-15 and 300 rounds of ammunition and killed 7 kids. And so Cornyn and Murphy said, let's pass a law that says for the purpose of a background check, what you do as a teenager does not go away automatically at the age of 18. Now, I don't know how many people are going to be saved as a result of that, but it's going to be some people who are going to live because of that. And I see more of that happening. I see Republicans and Democrats alike saying, you know what, let's try and get something done. Now, it'll be tough because we'll have we'll have a president who's going to be weak. They'll be in their second term. Second terms are not happy times. I went through one, not happy. And this one's going to be very unhappy. But nonetheless, I think there's a growing sentiment in Congress, and the younger leadership that's coming up is like, let's get something done.
Question? Yes, Paul.
How do we get more John Cornyns and fewer Marjorie Taylor Greens?
Vote for the more John Cornyns and don't vote for the Marjorie Taylor Greens. And also,
Party.
pardon me?
I mean, the party needs to.
Yeah, but and we are the party, both Democrats and Republicans. We are our respective parties. And what we need to do is encourage people like that and reward them. And the people who are like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Tom Massey, whom I took a whack at in my column today, they need to hear that we don't like it. But we need to, look, these are people. I've got over the last couple of weeks, I had 4 or 5 conversations with friends in the House. If I vote for Ukraine, I may draw a primary opponent. I said, so what? What did you go up there to do? Have courage. Every one of them who was like wringing their hands voted the right way. And you know what? We need to reward people for that.
Yeah, but the speaker, look at the abuse the speaker's taking from his own party.
You know what though? Read my column today. He's going to come out stronger because they're weak. When they said we want him to resign so we can do this in our caucus. They were saying, we don't have the votes, please give up. And he's not going to give up because the Democrats understand that they provided 208 votes to get rid of McCarthy. They hated McCarthy. I've known Kevin a long time. I was shocked how much the Democrats hated him. But even through their hatred, they understand they took part of the blame. That's why Congress is so low. So they're not going to be sitting saying, oh yeah, I'm going to go along with that nut who's worried about space lasers run by the Rothschilds. I'm going to do what she wants me to do. They're not going to do it. So they'll find some way to sort of, play cute with it in order to sort of embarrass the speaker, but he's going to come out of this thing stronger. This is a guy who did the right thing. And he did the right thing because he was a leader who went and accepted the briefings and got told things that you and I are not allowed to know that caused him to say, this is a real problem. And he's going to come out stronger rather than weaker.
Next question.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, go ahead, shout it out.
Joanne? Yep.
I have a voice.
Yep.
Yes, you do.
Go right ahead.
I feel a little bit like the Lorax right now because I am going to say that I am here to speak for the students. I teach at a university. My students have spent their adult years, their becoming aware of the world years, being told that politics doesn't work, that the voting system is corrupt, that you can't trust government institutions, that there's no point in voting, that none of it makes any difference. I don't really know how we undo this, and I know the Sumners trying to fix that, but this is broad, and I feel it's continuing. I feel that there is an actual effort to discredit the institutions that allow American democracy to continue.
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Well, first of all, not the first time we've been here. You think people are unenthusiastic about our institutions, the government? Think back to the 60s and 70s.
I do remember that.
Yeah, and think about we're back to the future again, and what it's going to take is leadership. I'm glad the Sumner is doing what it's doing. We need more of it, but at the end of the day, what happens is leadership matters. When we had we were so desperate after the resignation of Richard Nixon that Gerald Ford, good man, stepped in, did the right thing, pardoned Nixon so that we didn't have to go through that, and yet he lost the election because the country was so desperate. We turned to the guy from Georgia, the good Christian man who'd restored dignity and honor to the White House, but he turned out to be weak and feckless, and he was a good man, but he was weak. But the country was all balled up, and along comes the B actor from California. We have one debate. There's a huge number of undecided voters at the time of the October debate, and the country is like trying to figure it out. And Carter makes a mistake of saying, I talked to my 14-year-old about nuclear disarmament, and Reagan had a simple message: are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And kept talking about how the fact he was the governor of California. And back then, California had a slightly different reputation than it had today. And we know what happened. The undecideds moved to Reagan, and the country was back. We had a couple of tough years, but we had confidence that we were on our way back. Same thing, it happens. If you go back to the 1930s, 1 out of every 4 Americans out of work. We are kept together as a country by a man who cannot stand on his own 2 feet, but he has given us confidence that we have nothing to fear but fear itself. You think the politics of today is broken? Go to the Gilded Age. They're fighting the Civil War on the floor of the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. 5 presidential elections in a row in which nobody gets 50% of the vote. 2 elections in which the winner in the Electoral College loses the popular vote. 1 election that takes from November of 1876 to March 2nd of 1877 to settle, and it requires a special commission of former and current judges to settle the election. And on March 2nd, 1877, they award the disputed votes of South Carolina, Florida and Louisiana, where a majority of the eligible voters are black men, overwhelmingly Republican, and yet the 3 states have supposedly fallen into the hands of the Democrats, but only by violence on a scale that is impossible for the modern mind to comprehend. And they award the three states votes to Rutherford B. Hayes, making him president by a vote in the Electoral College of 185 to 184, and he's sworn into office 2 days later. So don't tell me we're screwed up in a way that we haven't been screwed up before. And I could go back even before that. But anyway, the point is, yeah, it's going to require leadership. And we're going to have to make that leadership.
And on that positive,
There we go.
Just
One last
following in that line of leadership, do you think that if Trump is elected president, that he's going to be a president of retribution, which he keeps saying?
I don't know. And I think that's what this campaign is going to try and figure out. I mean, people are going to try and figure out what is the governing vision of these 2 men for the next 4 years, and which one do we trust more than the other in order to occupy the most powerful office on the face of the planet. And we'll survive no matter what, and the guardrails are strong enough that regardless of whether we get one or the other, we'll survive. But the question is, will we prosper and will we lead? Because we're in a dangerous moment for the world. This is more dangerous than probably any moment since the Cuban Missile Crisis. We have 4 adversaries who are looking at us each and every day with the eye of weakening the West and weakening the United States. Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. And while we used to have the ability to sort of face down the Soviets, we now got 4 big adversaries. And this president and whoever the next president is, whoever's president after November, had better step up and lead, because the fate of the world depends on it. The peace and prosperity of our country for our kids and our grandkids depends upon American leadership in the years ahead.
I'm going to hold on to the note of the optimistic piece before what you just said. And I want to thank so much to the Sumners Foundation. Thank you very much for your support and partnership. Sumners Foundation, we appreciate you. Thank you very much for coming. And Karl, you are always a pleasure to talk with.